Chapter 28, Our Life in New Zealand begins. I finally left Singapore in a Hercules piloted by the station commander, Group Captain Merriman. Squadron leader Colin Loveday, the Kiwi also leaving the service, was on board as well. We were fortunate that the Hercules was fairly empty, so we were able to get our kit and Colin's new Triumph car on board. The car proved very useful as the passenger seats in the Herc were quite uncomfortable. After takeoff, Colin and I were able to sit in the comfortable reclining front seats of the Triumph. I have always told the story that we traveled 4,500 miles in 3 days by car, without using any petrol. We stopped the night at Darwin at the R.A.A.F base at Amberley, near Brisbane, arriving on the third day in Auckland at the ANZAF base at Wainuipe. I checked into the Travelodge Hotel and then went to Auckland Airport to meet Gladys, who came in on a civil airline flight that evening. We spent 2 nights in Auckland before leaving for Blenheim to stay with Valerie and Sean for my 2 months terminal leave. I contacted my old friends, Sam and Betty McHardy, and I shall always remember Betty's opening remark when I phoned them. "What on earth have you come to live in this silly little country for?" she asked. I am afraid Betty had never really taken to New Zealand. Unfortunately, this remark did not help Gladys much, who also had her doubts about settling in New Zealand. Later they came round to the hotel and met Gladys for the first time. In the next few months, once we settled in Auckland, both Betty and Sam did a great deal to help us settle into our new life. We flew down to Wellington in an NAC Boeing 737, the first time I had flown in this type of aircraft, which, as we had a strong northerly wind, the flight only took 50 minutes. From Wellington we flew in a Fokker Friendship to Woodburn, where Valerie and Sean met us. The weather over the next 2 months was quite hot most of the time and we enjoyed our stay very much. We took family picnic outings to Nelson, the Marlborough Sounds and Picton, and other local beauty spots. Sally, Valerie's first baby, was now about 18 months old and lots of fun. Our initial transition to civilian life was very much cushioned by the fact that we were staying in a married quarter, on an Air Force base, surrounded by service people. Sean and I played golf quite often at the local courses and I regularly joined him at the office's mess for a drink. In those days Blenheim was a place where you could leave your house unlocked, also leave your car in the same state. You could even leave your shopping in the car and no one would touch it. Coming from Singapore, where we never left our car or house without locking up everything, it came as quite a surprise. A few days after our arrival in New Zealand I travelled to Wellington to arrange validation of my civil flying license. The civil aviation people were not very helpful, and to my surprise advised me they would only grant me a basic commercial pilot's license. They would not accept either my service flying instructor category, or my current jet instrument rating. What irked me even more was the assessing officer was an ex-R.A.A.F instructor who had been on the staff at the R.A.A.F Central Flying School when I did my course there. Despite the evidence in my flying logbooks and certificates, this chap would not budge, stating that I would have to go through a flight and ground test to gain both my flight instructor license and my instrument rating, to have them validated in New Zealand. I met this impracticable bureaucracy whenever I had dealings with civil aviation in Wellington, as did many others throughout the country. Out in the field I found that the regional examiners and officials quite reasonable. This ruling meant that I had to go through a period of ground training and flying practice at the Marlborough Aero Club at Omaka near Blenheim. Then take a flight test with a local flight testing officer. My future job with the Auckland Aero Club hung on getting the appropriate civil instructor category. Fortunately, with the help of Alan Graham, the CFI at Omaka Airfield, I passed the flight test okay with Taffy Evans, the regional testing officer. However, I would still have to take formal exams and a further flight test for my instrument rating. I was not amused by all this, but I was determined to succeed nevertheless. It was my first taste of the obdurate New Zealand government bureaucracy, but it was not the last. Other people I spoke to were astounded that all my experience in instructing and instrument flying should count for nothing, as far as the civil aviation department in Wellington was concerned. Yet they granted the categories I required to all ex-RNZAF pilots. To enable us to have temporary housing, especially when we got to Auckland, we bought a caravan, to go with the new Ford Falcon station wagon which I had bought on arrival. We parked the caravan in Valerie's garden and slept in it, but lived otherwise in her house. Christmas came and went and we set off for Auckland, where I was due to begin working at the Aero Club at Ardmore Airfield, some 20 miles south of the city. Before leaving for Auckland I had phoned the Auckland Aero Club to let them know I was on my way. It was a call that caused some amusement and comment at the club and is still remembered today. When the call was answered I heard a voice say there's some posh speaking pom on the phone. The chap making the comment was Darren Price and we have often joked about it afterwards. Ross Dawson, another instructor, answered a few questions I asked, but the one he always recalls is when I asked where the nearest golf course was. This apparently gave rise to the view amongst the club instructors that they were about to be joined by an ex-wing commander, who was going to fly a bit and play golf. Once I joined the club they found me to be a quite different person to what they had imagined. We drove to Picton early in January, with car and caravan, and crossed to Wellington by the car ferry. The journey from Picton to Wellington through Queen Charlotte Sound was quite beautiful, especially in summer weather. From the capital we drove to North Auckland, stopping a couple of times at caravan parks en route. On arrival in Auckland we found a permanent site at a caravan park at Papatoetoe, about 10 miles from Ardmore Airfield. The camp was very full, as the summer holidays were in full swing, and in addition, there was the annual National Bowls tournament being held in Auckland and lots of the participants were staying in caravans on the site. It turned out to be a tough time for Gladys, trying to settle in. She has never been a keen camper or caravaner and found it very difficult to get used to the life. I began work at the Aero Club and the days were long and hard, for I left early in the morning and did not get back till after 6 in the evening. It was, of course, a very busy flying period for the club. We would fly 6 or 7 instructional trips per day, but more of that later. Meanwhile, we made the best of our camping life. Fortunately there was no shortage of places to visit on our free time. Sam McHardy introduced me to the Officers Club, then situated in the center of Auckland, where I joined immediately and was given every help by the secretary. Lieutenant Colonel Roy Spence and his charming wife Trudy, who went out of their way to introduce us to members. This gave us a firm basis for our social life, where we were amongst ex-service officers and their wives. When I reported to the Aero Club, Lou Day, who had been CFI and was now operations manager, made me most welcome. Later Gladys and I met up with him and his wife Doreen, after all the long years since sharing a flat at Kinloss in 1948. The CFI was a very nice chap named Frank Wright, who is also most helpful in getting me started, and I soon got ratings on the various aircraft that the club had online. Firstly, Colin Loveday, who had started at the club earlier, checked me out in the Victor trainer. This 2-seater side-by-side trainer with a 100 HP engine had originally been designed and manufactured in Australia by, of all things, the Victor Lawnmower Company. That is a story all of its own. I found the aircraft pleasant and easy to fly, with one unusual feature, a central control stick, which served both the instructor and the pupil. However, it only took one flight to get used to this form of control. The aircraft was very robust and had an excellent aerobatic performance, and I was to find it a very comfortable aircraft to instruct in. It was also very forgiving and a very safe aircraft for students to begin their flying on. We always reckoned that it would be an idiot who killed himself in Victor. The club also had Cessna 172s which I had already flown in Singapore, plus likewise the Piper Cherokee 140. 2 other aircraft I needed to check out were the Mooney and the Cessna 336 twin-engined aircraft. The 336 was a 6-seater, twin-boom, twin-engined aircraft, with 2 150 HP engines, one at the front and a pusher propeller engine at the rear. The club carried out extensive charter work, including regular daily schedules to Great Barrier Island, 56 nautical miles northwest of Ardmore. They also had a contract to fly New Zealand forest product personnel between Auckland and the company wood processing mill at Kinleith, 70 miles south of Ardmore near Tokoroa Township. In those days there was no airport at Tokoroa, but there was a short airstrip alongside the mill at Kinleith. After check rides to all these places I began flying my share of the charter flying, providing a nice break from continuous instructing. I soon settled into a pretty hectic flying schedule. We were also required to do a certain amount of ground lectures. The Aero Club had 3 divisions: the pure club side, Auckland Air Charter, the Charter Division, and the NZ College of Aviation, the Commercial Pilot Training Division. As a flight instructor, one was involved in all 3 activities. For the first few months I was flying around 70 to 80 hours per month, so I soon gained a first-class knowledge of flying in New Zealand conditions and a knowledge of the country, especially the North Island. I was enjoying the life, and I also was getting on well with the other staff. Contrary to what they feared, I was not a stuffy old pom, but mucked into all the work just as they did. We had to refuel the aircraft ourselves and put them all in the hangar at night. No easy task, as it was a real squeeze, and had to be done carefully so as not to cause damage. So-called hangar ash. Often we put them all away at night or brought them out in the morning and aided. One had to be careful to ensure the aircraft needed for an early charter went in last, and were refueled ready to go on the various early schedules. We had a roster of early or late starts or finishes, and we also worked weekends, having days off during the week. The effects of this lifestyle for Gladys, living in a caravan, was not at all conducive to settling into New Zealand. She was very lonely and unhappy, for with Valerie in the South Island, some 400 miles away, she might as well be in another country. We really began to doubt the wisdom of coming to live in New Zealand. Additionally, from having servants in Singapore, Gladys had to get used to roughing it in a caravan park with all sorts of people quite different to what she had known. This made me realize that it was essential for us to get a permanent home as soon as possible, and to this end we began an urgent house hunting campaign. After endless looking over a varied assortment of houses, we were taken to one we knew immediately was right for us. It was a 3-bedroom colonial bungalow in a very lovely estate in Manuawa, about 7 miles from Ardmore and about 20 miles south of Auckland City. With the help of a good real estate agent, we got the house for £18,500. This is hard to believe now, for the house 25 years later is worth 4 times that in New Zealand dollars. Once we got into the house and had the pleasure of buying our first set of furniture etc., things got better. We were able to get all our other goods and chattels out of store and set up the first ever home of our own. The house was surrounded by a fence and had a nice garden both back and front. All seemed well as we settled in, until on one of my free days, a fortnight after we moved in. I had bought a second-hand rotary mower, the first I had ever used. My inexperience ended up in near disaster when I tried to clear the grass away from the opening by the rotor blade. I chopped the top of a finger off on my left hand and severely cut the rest. A passing motorist rushed me to the hospital, where I spent 4 hours on the operating table having it all sewn up. It was a terrible shock to us both. But whilst on the operating table I talked the doctor and nurse into taking flying lessons. There's salesmanship for you. Fortunately, after a painful few days I was able to go back to work, and as it was my left hand I was soon able to fly again. Not long after this episode, Valerie and Sean took some leave and came to stay with us. They were very taken with the house and how we had it furnished and set it up. That made them seem to be a lot nearer, and to help further, they had been posted to Ahakia, a base near Palmerston North, and only 250 miles away, enabling us to see one another more often. One thing about being an instructor at an aero club is that you quickly get to know and become known to a wide range of people from all walks of life. The members who fly bring a broad spectrum of experience to the club. When you are new to a country such as I was, circulating with members, both flying and socially, helped a great deal to understand the Kiwis a lot better. I also enjoyed the company of the other members of the staff, both the pilots and the ground engineers. My considerable flying experience gave me a degree of prestige once it became known. Unfortunately, after a few months there appeared a wide rift amongst the committee and Lude, which all centered on the future club policy. There was a considerable difference of opinion as to how important the charter and commercial training should be over the club flying. Eventually, Lude left and with others, set up another aero club on the airfield. Frank Wright, the CFI, was also leaving to take up a post overseas, as an instructor in Thailand. The president, Grant Beale offered me the appointment as CFI and I decided to accept it, albeit reluctantly, because of my loyalty to Liu Day. We had enjoyed a good relationship and I was grateful to him for the help that he had given me in getting into the club. We had also enjoyed some good times flying to air shows around the North Island. Very quickly we had worked up a formation display, using the 6 Victor trainers, displays which took us to Taranga, Whangarei and Gisborne. I have always suspected that Lou thought I had been behind the maneuvers that led to his departure, but I was in no way involved. Just soon after I joined the club, a young private pilot was causing to stir with his plan to fly solo around the world in a Victor. The civil aviation people were opposed to this plot, with only 200 hours experience, carrying out his plan. They insisted that before he set off he must hold an instrument rating, although there was no regulation otherwise to prevent him going, on a private pilot's license holder. Cliff Tate was a quite determined young man who, as most New Zealanders know, achieved his aim. By considerable courage and a press-on spirit, aided by a lot of luck as well, he succeeded. On his return the Aero Club put up a formation, which I led, to welcome him to Auckland and escort him all the way to his home city of Hamilton. I was to have a great deal to do with Cliff Tate later, when we were both flying for the same company in Hamilton. There was a great variety of flying with the club. In particular, some of the air ambulance flights were interesting and often dramatic. They took us to places and airstrips we would not normally go to. One particularly unusual flight I did was to land a Victor in the car park at the Alexandra Park racetrack in Auckland. The aircraft was to be displayed in a static exhibition. I got it into the car park okay, but unfortunately, it would not go through the gates and into the exhibition site, so I had to fly it out again. I am not sure which was the most dicey, flying it in or flying it out. As the year wore on I become rather unsettled in the Aero Club life. I found that, at my time life and what had meant to be a form of semi-retirement, the demands from the job of CFI were too much. I wanted to enjoy a more settled life at home and be free at weekends, so I decided to look for another job, and in particular one which I would gain some experience of the business world. After applying for a number of posts I got one running the Auckland branch of an Australian company selling office furniture. I had the task of setting up the whole operation from scratch in a new showroom and office. The Aero Club told me they were very sorry that I was leaving and tried to encourage me to stay. However, I was sure that a less hectic working life would be better for Gladys and I in settling down in New Zealand. She was still not really happy in the country. When I left the club I did so with their blessing and agreement that I would continue to fly part-time as an instructor and remain a member.